Martin Luther King Jr. died in Memphis. Why was he in Memphis? He was in Memphis because of the sanitation workers' strike for how they did not pay the blacks compared to they paid the whites. He was in Memphis to counter the economic castration of our community. So much of the civil rights movement was lost on integration that we lost the concept of self-sufficient. So to this day, we're still at the mercy of our oppressors for our economic survival. This is why King said at the end of his life, he believed he led his people into a burning building, because he understood that you could not legislate the hearts of people. And legislation would not change their treatment of you. What you need is to be able to control and change your own condition. This is what King had come to realize. This is why he said he learned his people into a burning building, which is integration. And this is why we still deal with the economic castration today.
You are demanding that this city will respect the dignity of labor. So often we overlook the worth and the significance of those who are not in professional jobs, of those who are not in the so-called big jobs. But let me say to you tonight that whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth. One day our society must come to see this. One day our society will come to respect the sanitation worker if it is to survive, for the person who picks up our garbage as in the final analysis is as significant as the physician, for if he doesn't do his job, disease is rampant. All labor has dignity.
Let's be clear. The reason why the civil rights movement was successful is because of unity. The reason why it was most effective in the South, because they had a clear viewpoint of who their enemy was, who was hindering them from progressing. The burning building is integration because we don't understand clearly who is our enemy. When we move into those communities, we devalue our interests. We separate our interests from our community, and we move into communities who don't have your best interests at heart, who don't want you there simply because of your skin complexion. You making more money does not make them comfortable with being around you or dealing with you. They still look at you as the other blacks who you left behind. The difference is you don't have the support of your community no more because you moved out there and you took your resources with you, leaving your community impoverished. And the lack of unity in your community, in our inner city community, is why other people could come into our community and financially benefit off of us, have stores and businesses in our community, is because we lack that unity. King was in Memphis. This was an economic battle. This was an economic issue. This was economic castration, and this economic castration continues today because we never dealt with the real fight, and the real fight is true ownership. That is the only way to be free and independent, is if you don't have to be dependent on their system. We need to be clear, none of these discriminations has ceased in America, on the job, economically, when it comes to banking, when it comes to housing. None of these discriminations has ended. The problem is we lack the unity, the discipline in order to do anything about it. That is the problem. We lack the unity to collectively target any individual company as the collective so that they can feel the effect. We, so that's part of it. We also have to understand that.
Big story happening in the nation's capital today took place at the Supreme Court, where Byron Allen's racial discrimination case against Comcast came before the 9 justices. 8 were there. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was ill and was not in the court today. Now, at issue is whether Allen's $20 billion lawsuit should have survived beyond the pleading stage by merely proving that his race was a motivating factor in Comcast's decision to deny carriage to his company's channels. Now, the Ninth Circuit ruled in favor of Allen last year, and some of the justices found fault with the lower court's reasoning. Joining me right now to talk about what happened today is Byron Allen, CEO of Entertainment Studios. Byron, glad to have you here.
Very well. And our attorneys, especially Dean Chemerinsky, who is the foremost scholar on constitutional law and has written about it as well. I think it's very clear that it is a motivating factor and not but for. This was put on the books 153 years ago to protect the newly freed slaves, to make sure that
Civil Rights Act,
to make sure there was a pathway for economic inclusion. And it wasn't set, for the impossible standard that you must prove that 100% of the reason that I am not doing business with Roland, 100% is that he's black. And unless you can prove that it's 100%, Roland can't even bring the law forward. So they literally could say, look, it's 99% because you're black and 1% because you're wearing tennis shoes, and you can't use the law. That's the motivating, that's the but-for standard. What the Ninth Circuit said, the motivating factor, which is if any part of the decision is because Roland is black, that you didn't do it, that's enough for Roland to simply use the law and bring it forward. And I think the questions were really terrific from the justices, because they were like, well, hey, Roland doesn't know what he doesn't know. He has to go into discovery.
Comcast not even arguing that his race was not one of the factors in determining not to carry his channel. Comcast is arguing that his race was not the only factor in determining whether they would carry his channel or not. That is the argument. And they arguing that they could discriminate against you for your race, but due to the fact that race is not the only reason they discriminated against you for, then you cannot use the civil rights process. So,
because his networks they're lowly rated. They have the low ratings. Well, listen, in Discovery, we can show the world that they have over 100 networks on their platform that are white-owned that have a lower rating than ours. Then they'll say things, well, he doesn't have good quality. It's low quality. Well, our networks are Emmy Award nominated and Emmy Award winning. And through Discovery, we can show that they carry networks, over 100 networks that are white-owned, that have never been nominated for an Emmy and have never won an Emmy. They will say things like, this is, this has nothing to do with race. Well, they've already proven by going and partnering with Donald Trump's DOJ to get an amicus brief that that there's a great deal of racial, there's institutionalized racism there. I mean, not only did they get Donald Trump's DOJ to write the amicus brief, they did something we haven't seen in ever, which is they got Donald Trump's DOJ to testify, to argue in the courtroom with them in partnership. And it is the very first time the acting Solicitor General has ever gone into the United States Supreme Court to narrow a civil rights statute. So it just shows.
Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Yesterday, Diddy released an official statement basically telling Comcast to stop using my damn name. Now, of course, Comcast has been fighting Byron Allen over his lawsuit against them for not carrying his networks. They went to the Supreme Court where, let's just say, he ain't too happy. My name and my network, Revolt, have been mentioned recently by Comcast in reference to the Comcast Byron Allen U.S. Supreme Court case as an example of Comcast's inclusive practices with respect to African-American owned cable networks. While it is true that we are in business with Comcast, it is not accurate to use my name or my network as an example of inclusion. I do not want my name to be used inaccurately, so I must speak my truth. I also want to make clear that this case is now about much more than cable distribution. It's about the civil rights of millions of African Americans and other minorities. First, it's important that people really understand what's at stake. In its efforts to get the lawsuit filed by Byron Allen dismissed, Comcast has taken a legal approach that could weaken fundamental civil rights protections. I have a problem with this. The Civil Rights Act of 1866, Section 1981, was designed to ensure black people are able to do business in this country and not be denied because of race. Comcast is arguing that this law only applies if racial discrimination is the only factor that leads to a refusal to do business, which would be extremely hard to prove. If they are successful, it will become much harder for any victim of discrimination to seek justice in court. By taking this stance in the Supreme Court, Comcast has put its legal tactics ahead of the rights of millions of Americans to be heard. This is not okay. Above anything else, my goal has always been to achieve true economic inclusion for black people. How can Comcast suggest that it champions diversity and inclusion if it attacks the laws that provide the foundation for economic inclusion? What good are any of their efforts if they are fighting to make it harder for victims of discrimination to be heard in court? Comcast has made this about much more than Byron Allen, and now the civil rights of my children and my community are at stake. To be clear, anything that makes it harder to fight against discrimination is wrong. Comcast is choosing to be on the wrong side of history. On Revolt, I can only share the truth of my experience. Starting an independent cable network is incredibly difficult and capital intensive. The start we received from Comcast, which was a condition of the United States government approval for Comcast to acquire NBC Universal, was important. But it is not the level of support needed to build a successful African-American owned network. Not even close. Since that launch, our relationship has not grown, and Revolt is still not carried by Comcast in the most affordable packages, nor is Revolt available in all of the markets that would enable us to serve our target audience. Comcast spends billions of dollars on content network every year, but just a few million go to African-American owned networks like Revolt. That is unacceptable. Supporting diversity and economic inclusion requires a real partnership. The only way black-owned networks grow and thrive is with meaningful and consistent economic support. Otherwise, they are set up to fail. Revolt has never been in a position to truly compete on a fair playing field because it has not received the economic and distribution support necessary for real economic inclusion. Our relationship with Comcast is the illusion of economic inclusion. Rather than using this case to diminish the civil rights protections of millions of Americans, Comcast should use this as an opportunity to listen to a community it relies on and, above all, do better. That was Diddy.
Video will be broken up because there's multiple black channels complaining about the distribution they receive through Comcast, as well as the lack of subscriber fees that they receive, and how Comcast continuously work to prevent them from being able to progress. Black people have to understand that the economic exclusion, the economic castration, it was created the condition that we are in today. We have to take control of our economics. We have to hold other people accountable.